Welcome to episode 49 of the Headspace and Timing podcast, a show brought to you by the Change Your POV podcast network. Today, I'm talking with Air Force veteran and marriage and family therapist Reg McCutcheon. Reg and I have been talking for a while, and each of us support veterans in our local communities as both veterans and mental health professionals. Much of Reg's focus is how the service member's family can impact and support veteran mental health and act as a first responder in a veteran's life.
We are their best asset because we're the front line for them. We're their front line when they come back. And in truth, we teach these young men and women to go over and be willing to die for anything. But how do we bring them home and teach them to live for everything else? That's my greatest question. And that falls back right on us, you, me, and our families and our communities, to teach them what other relationships are about, that they can trust us and be there. We'll be there for them. And at whatever capacity they plug in, we have to be ready to lift them up and get them engaged rightly, but not with a bottle or alcohol and drugs. And that's where we have to be very careful, because they'll turn to that or turn to some escape mechanism soon.
Welcome to the Change Your POV podcast network. You're listening to Headspace and Timing, a show dedicated to breaking down the stereotypes about veteran mental health. My name's Dwayne France, and I'm a combat veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan. After I retired from the Army, I took on a new mission as a clinical mental health counselor for my fellow service members. If you served in any branch of the military, you're familiar with the M2 machine gun, the 50 cal. It's one of the most effective weapons in the military's arsenal. If the weapon's headspace and timing wasn't set right, however, it was just a huge useless chunk of metal. Veterans can be rendered inoperable if their headspace and timing isn't set correctly either. That's my goal with this show, to change the way that we think and talk about veteran mental health and reduce the stigma against seeking support. Each week, we'll talk with mental health professionals, veterans, and those who support veterans, service members, and their families. We're going to have real and honest conversations about a topic that most just don't like to talk about, veteran mental health. Let's jump into this week's conversation. Hey everybody, welcome back to Headspace and Timing, a podcast where we're trying to change the way that you think about veteran mental health. As you know, that we really appreciate you coming here and listening to us and taking the time to understand more about how you can learn about veteran mental health, about how you can support veterans in their post-military lives. We have another interview guest here today, and like me, this guest is a military veteran and a mental health professional. So it's going to be interesting, again, as we always try to give sort of some idea about the different aspects of what mental health professionals can provide to veterans. And since there are few mental health professionals who are also veterans in the field, I'd like to be able to highlight those. So my guest today is Reg McCutcheon. Reg, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dwayne, for having me. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been trying this kind of off and on, but I'm glad we were able to kind of make it happen. So yeah. I guess I'd like to get started with you talking a little bit about your military career and telling the audience a little bit about yourself.
Okay. 34-year veteran, started out enlisted in 1980, fresh out of high school, green as the grass, and the pickle suits we wore then. And, realized not too long into that, a couple, 3 years later, that O's made a little more money than the E's, and, was taking night classes and decided I would try for a commissioning program. I got lucky. And at any rate, got accepted, and, went to the officer corps and did space and missile programs for many, many years, and then retired in 2014 after a tour in Afghanistan, and it opened my eyes. And have to say it was an enlightening experience at 49 or 50, going to Afghanistan, seeing a lot of kids with some struggles and some things. And some of these guys had been on their, second and third tour. I just recognized some struggles. Now, again, space and missile guy, looking at this and recognizes the problem, why it really changed the vector for me, really forced me to get a different point of view, to use your words. So I as soon as I got back, I started working on my master's degree in therapy, marriage and family therapy, and really felt like I had to help, had to make a difference, because I just couldn't let it lay there because I saw the family suffering too.
Yeah, so I mean, and that's and it does take a shift. Like I did, you were not a mental health professional.
No.
When you were in the military. I mean, there are some basic leadership aspects, of course. Me being enlisted and you as an officer, that we take care of the troops and everything like
Sure.
that. But what was that shift from really a specific, very specialized industry in the military to the mental health profession?
Well, for me, it was, getting an education was just paramount, because, you really need to be qualified to do this level of stuff. If you're going to really want to make great changes and try and be therapeutic, you really need the education. Let me say that, because there's some things in there that we learn, and you know this, that you don't want to try this at home stuff. And so, because you could really hurt somebody if you're not careful too. And confidentiality and just techniques and stuff. You really have you need to be trained to do it. And that was why I did it. But when I retired, the decision was that I wanted to help people for free. I didn't want to be an issue of somebody having money or not, but that was my choice. And not everybody's the same. I wasn't looking for a reason to go find work. I already had work, and I knew it was there. And that was kind of my motive. I wasn't looking to get paid. I was looking to help and make a difference where I could, and hopefully build something that we could get more people involved in, that for different things. And those that could give an hour in those programs, or we could work that connection side to get support for vets and their families.
So, and you kind of briefly touched on this, and way back in episode 1, I kind of broke it down for our listeners about the different types of master's level mental health professionals. So I am a licensed professional counselor, and you are a licensed marriage and family therapist, which are, and again, the third one, licensed clinical social worker, but they each have sort of their different focus. Why did you choose marriage and family therapy over sort of my focus as an individual?
Well, it's just because I really believed it was a family issue. It's a systemic challenge that we face. And it was really something that really followed my thinking. Not that other programs don't think that. LPC logic is, we're dealing with individuals. Social work is usually the system. We got to connect people differently. But they also have, let me rephrase that, they have a clinical side too, but typically they're working some of the care and feeding issues. With marriage and family therapists, as much as I start with one, I work with the whole family, and I know you can too, but it's really kind of the way we're taught. We're taught just a little differently in the system logic, that there's a family of origin, there's a connection process, and as you know, you use post-traumatic stress as an example. Parent coming back from combat, it has an effect on the family, because the kids experience, even the dog and even grandparents experience it to some level. So you just have to know that there's second and third order effects that occur in there, and I'm sure you can handle, as many others can. I don't want to take away those things. It's just it just kind of fit into my model and design.
Well, and you're absolutely right. I mean, it's different aspects of the same problem, and
sure.
Or the same, but it's just the same condition,
right?
And I've heard it said before, whereas for me, my focus is on the individual, as you said, the client. But for marriage and family therapists, the relationship is the client. Would that be accurate?
Yes. I think that's a good way to say it. The relationship is the client. Everything's connected. I'm connected to the chair I'm sitting in, and the chair's connected to the floor. That's a really simplistic approach. But without the chair, I'm on the floor. So, so there's a relationship dynamic in there between mom, dad's kids, and dad and kids, and mom and kids, and so on. And it's pretty interwoven. So there's a connectedness in there that we just have to learn. And a lot of times, Dwayne, what I deal with most is expectation management and communication issues. And usually when we start working with those, and we start getting to the root of many, many challenges. Roles reversal, coming out of a combat zone. Mom's been handling bills, assuming dad's been the one deployed, And, mom's been handling the bills and the kids, and then dad comes back and he wants to assume some of those roles he had before. And usually this little tug of war happen, and they don't talk about the expectations, so we try and deal with those in that way. And then the kids have the same challenge. They don't know who's who in the zoo or who's up next, and everybody's just trying to find an equilibrium that they've now had new habits to overcome. Again, expectation management, and it's just having honest conversations. And sometimes that's a very simplistic approach, but I think you get what I mean.
Sure, exactly. And I think it's always helpful to kind of, separate that out, because everybody, they call you doc, they call me doc, and, and it's not really, it's much more nuanced than that. Of course, the PhD level psychologists and PsyD and
right.
the research. And so
sure.
where everybody think a shrink is a shrink is a shrink, I think it's important to be able to identify, well, it's really maybe the difference between the oncologist and the ear, nose, and throat specialist, right? I mean, it's
absolutely.
And so you don't go, you don't just say a doc is a doc. And so if you need an orthopedist,
right.
you don't just go to the podiatrist. You find somebody that addresses what your concern is. And I think
absolutely.
that's one thing that we're not doing. Whether the mental health professional, I don't know how we do it or not, but we don't have the ability to make that distinction very much, and a lot of veterans I know don't really know that.
Right. No, they don't, and and there's good reason to check into each field specifically, and even ask questions of folks, because I'm EMDR trained, and that's an individual thing, and that I can work with. But not every client's married that I have. So is there a family issue in those? No. But, there's a connection process. It's just people coming through the door and you make them. But I think that, each therapist stands on his own, or counselor stands on their own merits and their skill set, because that's where we're ultimately challenged, to stay in our core skill set. When we get outside of those, it gets a little hairy and it's a little dangerous for us. So we just in the mindful process, I wouldn't practice EMDR without training. So that's kind of the best way to look at that. You just got to stay in your skill set. Nor would I practice oncology without the training either. So, yeah.
And something that you had brought up even earlier that struck me was that you recognize that this is such important work that I can't do it without training and education.
Absolutely.
I'm sure that you've heard it, and I've heard it. A lot of people are talking about veteran mental health that don't have clinical training, right? It's sort of like, well, I have a brain and I use my brain, so I should know about the brain. I mean, and I don't mean to be dismissive to anyone, but I've actually heard people proud of the fact that they have the lived experience, but they're not. I don't have a license. I don't need a license to talk to you about psychology. And so the lived experience that you and I have, the military experience that you and I have, combined with the clinical training we receive, supports each other exponentially.
Absolutely.
It's different. It's someone who has all experience and no clinical training cannot be effective. Neither can someone with all the clinical training and not the cultural competence or experience.
That's exactly right. That's absolutely right. And, Dwayne, our experiences only inform our ability to be therapists. And that's what we have to look at. It's an informed space. It doesn't make us experts. It just informs our understanding of how therapeutic approach works. And it allows us to have a therapeutic plan with meaning. And, it's really difficult to apply some of those logics without a little background. So with that being said, we have folks out there that are amazing peer mentors, or amazing just encouraging folks, lifting them up, doing some coaching things. And that's awesome. We need that. But sometimes when it gets a little difficult, and we're dealing with, the emotional and the psychological issues, and we're mandated reporters. We're trained to look for key things, regarding suicide, risk to others, et cetera, that if we're not on top of that, then you miss it. And then, you just got to know when to, take your hand off the wheel. No, it's not your wheel. That you need to get some help, and not trying to do that because you'll be over your head real fast, and you'll say some things you regret because you're not informed enough by by the therapeutic approach. Just say these are the cues you're looking for. I mean, you spent the time in training like I did, and you really have to have some insight on what all that's about. And if you haven't, why you're putting yourself and other people at risk.
Yeah, I kind of, I don't go to the mechanic and say, hey, since I drive this car, I can fix whatever the problem is, right?
Absolutely.
Because I'm aware that,
Right.
there are limitations to what I can do and what I can't do.
Right.
I can, maybe change the brakes and do this and that. But when it gets to a certain level of technical skill that I acknowledge that I don't have, I don't try to I don't try to be something that I'm not, and that's what I'm
That's right.
seeing a lot in the community, especially around veteran mental health, and I don't wonder if that's because we're trying to get the word out so much and get veterans to talk and to reach out, but then maybe the resources aren't always there, and so people feel they have to step into the gap.
Well, and that's where I don't know how to say this, but that's where families come in my mind, and our connections and our tribe. I mean, I love Sebastian Junger's book Tribe. We're a tribe, and we have connections that we can always lean into. Because I know I could call you, Dwayne, and say, hey, I'm having a challenge, and I could speak our language to each other, and I know that I would get some honest feedback, because that's our military way. Now, we're not going to be able to call our banker and have that same conversation, but we can have it within our military or veteran tribe. So, but that's where families come in, and we get an opportunity to lean on our families, but we have to build into those relationships like we do anything else to be able to have those tough conversations and say, hey, I'm having trouble, or, that expectation management stuff, and good communication skills, which is really what we end up spending a lot of time on, but that's also a resiliency issue and how we're preparing families for this next season of what's going on. And so we're almost at the stage where we're in a pig and a python with our veterans and mental health issues, because there's just not enough to go around. And on the inverse side of that, there's a lot of young kids coming out of college, got their bachelor's degree, went straight into the master's program. They have an LPC, MSW, LP or MFT, and they're going in and going to work for the VA or going to work for somebody else, and they really, they don't have some of those skills. So often, I know I'm going a little off the reservation with this, but sometimes we have challenges out there that are very deep and inexperienced, and they're trying to follow a way that they don't understand, and they really can't even communicate with a vet on the very basic level. So where do we end up? In the same spot we're in, because they can't get the help. And, they're not getting the help because there's not as many people who's informed about the process or informed about what they're going through. And that becomes a whole other problem.
And again, I mean, and that is, like you said, that's part of the systems. And I like that idea of the family coming to stand in the gap. But when it comes to veteran mental health, maybe that's a little bit more touchy, of course, that the family may not approach. Now,
Right.
there have been times, of course, me being a guy and don't go to the doctor, my wife will step in and say, hey, I made you the doctor's appointment because, you cranked your ankle a week ago and it's still orange, or, whatever, right? But, or,
Absolutely.
you've been hacking up a lung for the last week, and so, shut up, big guy, and go to the doctor. And so,
Right.
yes, there is that where, a family member will step in and do that, but it's a little bit more touchy when it comes to mental health concerns. Maybe there's a safety concern, or I don't want to approach them because I might make it worse. There's not as much education for the families around how to approach or have a conversation with their loved one about how about you get some help.
That's right.
And I can't help but think that's a community education issue.
Absolutely. It absolutely. It is such a, you nailed it right there. It's community. It's our ability to develop our communities and build our capacity is that's probably the number one thing I spend a lot of time on. And I do a lot of lectures to I say lectures, presentations to, Rotary groups and MOA groups and things like that. And I have to impress upon the importance of capacity building. And that is, I think it challenges us because again, we're going to be, there's picking a python issue of veterans coming back and they isolate. They have the issue of shame. They have the issue of everything else that they don't want people to know they're having a problem. And so they self-medicate. But what do we do when we first notice it? And the first people to notice it are the people that are around them, in their family, in their workplace, in their churches, and, just the places they hang out. But because of our uncertainty, because we don't know and nobody's telling us what to do, why they actually do nothing out of fear. 90% of the families or veterans families looking for help, their first stop, I'm going to say 90% again, goes to the church. Their local, spiritual organizations say we need some help. So how are we informing our churches? How are we informing? If 90% are going there, how are we educating them? What are we telling them that they need to know? And I think part of the challenge there for us, Dwayne, is that, they need to know where they can get the resources they need. And then in certain communities, they have awesome resources, amazing assets they can turn to, and others not so much.
Right.
So there's a process by which we have to be able to educate our spiritual leaders. We have to educate our community leaders. And we also have to get to our families. So again, it's a capacity building process by which we have to educate so many levels. It's a little daunting, but again, VA can't do it all. And nor are they going to be able to, if they can't handle what they have, they're not going to be able to do the rest of it, because that's taking them home all the way. And again, our veterans' capacities, our need is far greater than our ability, so it's going to be in our back door if we're not ahead of it, and it's going to be overwhelming us in our own back door if we're not ahead of it.
And you're exactly right, of course, in that it is much on the families. One of my veteran clients will spend an hour with me, your client will spend an hour and a half with you, and then they'll go home and spend the entire week, so they got 1 hour a week with us, or the rest of the week with their family. And the family, is, I think, and perhaps even Josh Krameyer, who was he's a marriage family therapist. He was on episode 35, but he said that, it's sort of like you clean up the pig and then throw him back in the mud, right? You wipe off all the
absolutely.
And so it does take some support with the family, where of course we're limited by confidentiality and things like that.
Sure.
And that's really the goal, as with the blog, the Headspace and Timing blog, and even this podcast, is to be able to help family members understand what their veteran may be going through without the veteran having to tell them, to be able to say, hey, this guy, explained this in this way that I've not been able to tell you. And so I've had a lot of that, where spouses and even parents of veterans have read the blogs or listened to the podcasts and said, I understand things differently now. Thank you for kind of sharing that perspective.
Right.
But we as providers, we as mental health professionals, we don't do that enough to be able to get the message out to the communities.
Well, you're absolutely right. And it's because we're handling our own stuff. We got our own, we got clients knocking at the door, and we're dealing with the other things. And it's almost like we have to have just an education group doing this. And, just a simplistic thing. How do you know the signs of depression? How do you aware that people are dealing with depression? And most of the time, people can't answer that. It's one of the early signs of trauma and post-traumatic stress. And how are we able to discern that? And again, it comes back to the issue of shame and all that other language that comes on top of it, because we really everybody know Johnny's having trouble because Johnny's tough. He's a soldier, and that we want Johnny to be tough too, but we also want Johnny to be resilient. We want to be able to draw on that skill set rightly, but we are their best asset because we're the front line for them. We're their front line when they come back. And in truth, we teach these young men and women to go over and be willing to die for anything. But how do we bring them home and teach them to live for everything else? That's my greatest question. And that falls back right on us, you, me, and our families and our communities, to teach them what other relationships are about, that they can trust us and be there. We'll be there for them. And at whatever capacity they plug in, we have to be ready to lift them up and get them engaged rightly, but not with a bottle or alcohol and drugs. And that's where we have to be very careful, because they'll turn to that or turn to some escape mechanism soon if they can't get the relief they need, socially.
So what resources do you provide, maybe to help that education aspect, to help that understanding? Kind of what programs, national, maybe, that you recommend?
Well, there's several out there, and there's a lot of good ones. I think that, because I'm like you, I'm kind of working in my local area, just trying to inform this area. I live in southern Georgia, and it's an amazing community with wonderful people that are willing to help, and they love their veterans here, and that's great. And I kind of live in an isolated part of Georgia, so I actually find myself doing a lot of the footwork myself. There's some folks out there, and I'm going to mention a couple. I don't know where Dave Smith is from. He's out of Virginia or Tennessee, I think. But he runs a whole program similar to that informs churches and informs hospitals and informs groups. And, that was one of the first experiences I had with it. And then that's just been a carryover for me. Colonel Dave Smith is a retired chaplain now of the Army. And I don't know exactly what the name of his ranch is off the top of my head, but I can follow up with you on that. But ultimately, we have this capability that right here from our informed knowledge, you and me, to work in our community and inform them, and then hopefully we build up some contagion in that. A lot of other programs out there do great for weekend things. We'll give them a T-shirt, give them a good meal, but after that it kind of falls off the edge because there's no follow-up. There has to be a follow-up program. There has to be something that keeps people engaged so that we can continue moving forward. But also we have to spread it out. We have to get them to then step up to the plate and be part of the solution, not just not part of the problem over and over again. Ultimately, get people engaged that way. It's almost like MLM, to be honest with you, a multi-level marketing campaign. But the more we know, the more we can share, and everybody should be sharing it. Nationally, I don't know how that's going to happen. I don't know of any off the top of my head other than what you're doing on an amazing level with LinkedIn. But and I'm not a Facebooker, so I can't really speak to that program or what people are doing there. But I know what you're doing is informing very well. And, we just keep plugging at it. But unfortunately, that's all we have is to plug at it, because there's nothing really driving people other than necessity. And necessity sometimes gets us there. But if you don't know about it, your necessity will land short sometimes.
Right, and I mean, and it is everything really is local. I mean, obviously, what works in southern Georgia would be different than what works here, in similar in many respects, but then again different because of the community here in Colorado Springs, and even for us it would be the difference, I think, for you. What works in Atlanta doesn't work in Macon, right? Just because of the size of the community. For me, what works on the Front Range of Colorado will not work in the Central Mountains, just because of the same rural aspects and things like that. So there's different things that are similar and then very different. So it's great that you brought that out.
Right, and I think, Dwayne, that there's an opportunity here for us. I think locally, nationally, at the same time, and I think that I think that we haven't really developed this national program or this local, regional, national level program that people are operating off something that operates or helps, the veteran and the family. And let's just say, Sergeant, Smith retires and he steps in, he's looking for his veteran service officer, his local veteran office. And he usually goes to the courthouse or he fishes around one of the annexes until he finally finds a guy and he, gets all the insight he needs to get, plugged in as a civilian and in the community. But what if there's someplace different? What if there's a place where a veteran and his family could step into and get the help they need at every level, where all those resources were centered? And I'm not talking about a VA hospital. I'm talking about a VA center. That's not a Veterans Administration, but a vet center where a veteran could get the help they need, but the process really allowed assessment, allowed us to understand where he and his family were on their path. How far down the path are they? Are they mature? Have they got jobs already? Are they well adjusted? Do they know where they're going? Do they have a plan? financially, et cetera, you're able to assess all that, get them in school if they need to, mom, kids, dad, everybody, get them connected where they need to. But oftentimes we send them out too fast, too early. We'll send them to a program, Yellow Ribbon or something like that, and they, lipstick up their resume and they start firing it out to everybody they know, and come to find out, they're not speaking the same language, they're at the wrong level of job because, organizations don't understand that, a superintendent is a high level position. They just think it's a guy that, that does something else, not quite the level they expect because they don't always understand the language, the translation level, or the family's having emotional trouble and nobody's really identified yet. They haven't had a chance to talk about it or whatever reason. So there's no identification steps. So they're going to fail trying to get into the community. And we're not stopping the failure ahead of time. We're not getting upstream from any of this stuff. We're just trying to plug as many as we can in and letting the failures occur. And we've got to find a way to get ahead of that, because when they fail, we fail. And ultimately, we hurt them in their failure because we didn't prepare them well enough. We didn't educate them. We didn't stop for a second and take a breath. We didn't process well enough in the intake or in the processing stuff to say, wait a minute, maybe you need a little more training over here. Maybe you need to look at your resume a little harder. And there's lots of people out there willing to plug in the communities, and all you have to do is ask. Just like there's, the SCORE program for the Better Business program, why isn't there a retiree group that's helping, veterans kind of transition into this program? I think it's a valid concern, but I don't know if we're there yet. I just think there has to be something bigger and stronger for us to step into, and it can't just be this, this quilt work of people within a community. It has to be something very intentional, very focused at how does a family get connected, a veteran family or an individual. What do we do with them? Once they found the house and got the school plugged in, then what? We always have to answer the then what question, but we want it to be a then what and a success, not a then what and a failure and then another failure. Because sooner or later we're going to find them in a very uncomfortable spot. Sorry to ramble like that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that, and typically it's more like failure and then what? Like the failure comes before the question, rather than, the question and the failure. This is something that, and this has struck me since you and I have talked, I think even several months ago it was,
we did.
In some of the program, in one phrase that you had said then, and correct me if my faulty memory, but you said that yes, helping with resumes, yes, helping with, clothing, but beginning and end with mental wellness in mind. That
absolutely,
knowing that regardless if a veteran comes in or a veteran family comes in and says, I'm in need, that you don't just jump at solving that need. You say, okay, we'll solve that need, and ultimately we're going to get you in front of a mental health professional to really help you dig down to what the root cause of this is.
Absolutely.
And your approach there, I think, and that's something that I'll be honest with you, Reg, I've used it probably 6 or 7 times since I said it. That's where we need to get, is to say we need to begin and end with mental wellness, mental health, with therapy in mind. Not everybody needs therapy, absolutely. However, it can benefit people either in the short term or even the long term if we uncover things.
You don't know if you don't ask, but you don't know if you don't assess either. If you're not looking for it, and what I mean is just say it's just an intake person. I don't mean to simplify any job, so please just bear with me as I give the analogy. You take somebody just as an intake person, a receptionist, and they take them as they do it, fill out the form, sit down, and then, what do they notice and what are they being informed with in this person? And is there something, that we should be looking out for? And, there should be this process that just affords us the opportunity to gain insight. So we then, not as mental health professionals, but as just, the people handling them are aware that their health is important. And it's okay to say, I'm stressed. It's okay to say that I'm having trouble getting a handle, because it's when they don't say it that bothers me most, and it should bother all of us. And that with the mental health in mind at front and the back end, are you okay is a good question. Are you okay with this? What can we do next for you? How can we connect you in a way, or how can we make difference for you in this? And it really helps them get to the answers they need, but we have to be open to their desire and their ability to name if there is a problem or a challenge that they're faced. And, as you know as well as I do, it's not always 50 sessions of therapy that's going to help. It's usually 1 and 2, it really, you'd be surprised. People really don't know that it's not 50. It's 2, 3, 4. Most you ever get, if you're lucky, it's 5. But that's because, it's just processing. It's just simple. 2 or 3 is usually all it ever takes. It's just to get a different perspective.
Yeah, and it's not Freud on the couch. We're not going to sit here and do psychoanalysis for the next 3 years.
No.
That it absolutely can be very quick, or not necessarily painless. Yes, it can be challenging, but then so was Afghanistan, and so was basic training or boot camp. But I think that will take a shift in mindset where for everybody, anyone who's working to support veterans, is to say, my solution may not be the only solution that the veteran needs. You alluded to it before. I said, well, I polish up your resume, and then as long as you get a job, you will be okay. That's not always the case. That instead of mental health being an item off of the menu that you might get if you ask for it, that it become that it's the foundational piece.
Absolutely.
It's the central aspect that everyone is thinking, where is this veteran's mental health? Not are they mentally ill, because that's a totally different mindset,
right.
but how are they on their mental health and wellness? And are there signs that I can see that would cause them to maybe be less functional? Hey, substance use is an issue. Okay, I don't need to worry about that. But I am pretty bored, and I hate this sucky job sweeping up sawdust in the sawmill. Well, that's a purpose and meaning thing, and understanding X, Y, Z.
Right. Well, Dwayne, I got to say this, and just so you and I both are aware of it, we never want to confuse the symptomology with the disease. Of course, people are stressed when they're transitioning. Of course, people have challenges when they're coming off a rotation. Those things are normal. They're expected. That doesn't mean someone's ill. That just means they're stressed. Stress is an everyday occurrence. And we didn't, and you and I know this, that we need, this needs to be inform our culture as a narrative that, because people come off tour or separate from active duty or otherwise, doesn't mean they're ill. Just means they are transitioning and it's a stressful time. Sometimes just mental health will help you keep it in perspective. But it doesn't mean illness. It just means we're stressed. Who's not stressed? Driving town for 5 minutes, you get stressed with the guy chasing up the light, sort of thing. So you just have to be aware that not everything is a mental illness. It's just stress. Stress is a challenging thing.
And I think what you're talking about definitely of getting the foundation or moving things ahead. I get the sense that we're or even community or other veterans are expecting veterans to come out having mastered skill level 1 tasks, and we pass them on to skill level 2, 3, and 4. So for the audience who may not be familiar with this aspect of the military, is at each rank or grade level, especially speaking on the enlisted side, we have certain level of basic tasks. We call them skill level 1 tasks. And so, privates through specialists should master these tasks, and skill level 2 tasks are the next level up. And so you get advanced tasks. And so we talk about different skill levels. Reg, I'm not wondering if we're expecting somebody to get out and do an interview with a resume and dress properly for the resume. That's kind of 3 separate skill level 2 tasks that we're not sure if they've really mastered the skill level 1 task of communication.
Absolutely. And, again, assessment. When in doubt, ask and verify. And it's just to be able to go through that, because as well as I do, we practice these things. We get a chance to prove ourselves. If I'm proving myself to you, you're really not going to give me a job, but I've had a chance to walk through it, not only emotionally and verbally, but in reality, and you get a chance to give me some feedback so I don't make the mistake down the road or make those mistakes. And that's a little humility thing, but it's really necessary because, and let's just say, Mr. Manager out there, Mr. HR guy, whoever's doing the interviewing is looking for a set of things and has a preconceived idea about what veterans are, which you don't know, and you may not even know how he got it. So you then have to be able to, be articulate, be informed, but also be the best you can be. And I mean be the best you, not the best Dwayne or Rez, but be the best you are. And we want to grow on that. We're going to use that to your advantage. So when you step in, you're authentic, you're real, and you're not trying to play anything. You're just trying to be the best you can be. And those skill sets that you learn at 1 and 2 and 3, et cetera, are informers of that, but they don't always translate well. And we just have to be able to teach that on our end.
And I have often said, and I think you and I have had these conversations, the fact that of course it should start, whenever they're in the service, and again, not to bang the gong, but in transition assistance programs, they don't talk about mental health and wellness. They don't talk about the need to make sure that understanding how frustrating it may be not to get your needs met, or even explain what moral injury is, or give the family resources, and so they, again, with when I went through transition assistance program back in 2014, it was a week of fire hose and then, sort of out on your own.
That's when I went through too, Dwayne. And I can say that, I've learned so much about what I didn't know then. Since then, it really overwhelms me and thinks, well, what a waste of my whole time. I already had a resume. And that's what I was thinking when I was there, I think especially on several levels, there's great writers out there, great informed people. And I think of Pete Kilner right now. He talks about moral injury a lot and ethics injury. But I think that we need to be aware that those things are out there, and we have to be operating from an understanding that we don't know where they're coming from. And if we're not thinking of mental illness on either side of this, then we could be missing some really prime real estate time to fix or deal with some of that ahead of time before they get fully out. But everybody's afraid of something ending up on the record. That's always the number one fear. And I don't know how to get past that other than take the stigma off. And that's way above my pay grade.
Well, sure. And I think a lot of it is these conversations, obviously, this particular one that you and I are having now, or the extended conversation that you and I and others are having on social media, and just having these conversations to be able to say, it's you can be successful and also be struggling with something, and they're not mutually exclusive, and it's simply they can be something together, and they can almost inform each other. I'm not sure if you had seen back in January, as this episode is going to be airing in like March, I believe. But in January, Michael Phelps had just recently spoke to a conference in Chicago. Did you see that?
I did, actually. You just posted that recently again,
yes.
Didn't you?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Yeah, I saw that.
And so the idea of Michael Phelps coming out in a very public way and acknowledging that, and of course everybody had seen his his gaffes after, smoking weed and all of these other things. But then everybody saw that was the very public place, but then he pulled the veil back and say, after each Olympics, I was in severe depression, even to the point of suicidal ideation.
I believe it, yeah.
And this is a guy who is the winningest Olympic medalist in world history, and if any measure of success can be called success, it is his. And yet he's saying, I struggled with some of the worst depression, of course, for his life. But it sounds, and even you and I as mental health professionals, we say, well, of course that is, because, the extreme high and now I'm low, and what is my purpose and meaning? And what do you think about, one, somebody as public as a public figure as Michael Phelps coming out talking about that, and then just sort of that situation?
Well, I think it's amazing, first off, for people to come out and talk about, the struggles they have with with depression, anxiety, and otherwise, we really can't talk about it enough because it's a real challenge. In our fast-paced world, the expectations are always high, and we even put them on ourselves because we have our own language with expectation. You think about, the world's winningest athlete having depression, we logically think it doesn't make sense, but in truth, it makes perfect sense. You don't win without putting expectations on yourself. You don't get that way without, making choices that are sacrificial and taking opportunities that are also sacrificial. And when you don't meet the expectation, you're going to get a little depressed. But that's, and we're just dealing with daily life. He's dealing with things in a whole nother arena. And for Michael Phelps to come out and talk about it that way is a blessing, one, and two, something that we should be informed from, that we should take those opportunities in to talk about it even in our own house and around our own table and, at our dinner table and otherwise. We need to start a dialogue that talks about what that means for us. And, by him doing it, it invites it into the conversation. And just like you've talked about it, when was the last time you walked up to a friend of yours that, you hadn't talked to in a while and say, hey, haven't seen you in a while, man, let's talk about, did you hear about Michael Phelps? Or, because it's such it gives you a segue into talk about depression and even maybe your own sometimes. If you don't, then we're just still part of the problem because we're holding those secrets too. We got to be able to talk about that in a way that honors, the help that we can get if we share.
Yeah, absolutely. And I even think back to 2017 when Chris Cornell of Soundgarden, died by suicide, and it opened up and then I think it was Chester Bennington after that, months after that, and it opened up a national conversation again. All of a sudden, people were talking about it, and yes, and it did open up conversations with veterans, and there's this idea of high profile, you don't know the name of the veterans that took their own lives in the same day Chris Cornell did, but it does open up the conversation. It's just how do we sustain that conversation and make it more normalized? Exactly what you're talking about is what I'm trying to do, is make talking about veteran mental health as common as talking about the weather. How's the weather up there? How's how's your mood today? Are you in a good place? No, actually, no, I'm
Absolutely.
not. It's, and not with a stranger on the street, but with your brother and with your uncle and with your friend.
Absolutely. We don't end the conversation assuming anything. We enter the conversation with our own dialogue and our own meeting so people can join it or not. And we don't assume every veteran's got a problem. We just assume that there are problems within the culture, within the population, just like in our regular population. And as you and I talk about veterans issues, suicide is an ideology in every group we know, just like depression is, just like anxiety is, just like trauma is. It's in every group. So as much as it's a veteran issue, it's a culture issue, and we just need to be able to accept that. And then within our own groups, create a way to speak to it, create a way that it becomes part of the discussion, and then it becomes not a veteran issue. It's really a cultural issue.
And yes, I think there does, in many places, are trying to change the conversation about mental health in general. Of course, you and I specifically focusing on veteran mental health. You had mentioned Give an Hour before, and the national platform that they have. They have the campaign to change direction, where they're getting into again, community awareness, helping people understand the signs of healthy habits and emotional well-being. And I'll make sure to put the link to that in the show notes. But it's to be able to help people to just to make it as normal as it actually is. That's the problem. Is it is so commonplace, but it's also hidden, and that which is hidden is not going to be taken care of.
It's dangerous, absolutely. We just have a culture now where I talk about expectations all the time, and all those things that just interfere with just routine, and we don't perform or we underperform, or our cultures now where you can, kind of slam people whenever you want. And, so we just know there's lots of triggers, and we have to be secure in ourselves, and we have to know that our purpose is more than some of those expectations and some of those things. And being healthy within yourself is part of that. And, that comes from our community. That comes from our tribe. It comes from the people we hang out with, and knowing that just a simple question, are you okay? Can I help? Can we do anything? Can we be connected? What can we do? And that reassurance defends or defeats actually, those naysayers out there and those expectations that we have that, that we didn't meet a certain objective or a goal. Well, those are all man-made things, and we only operate as best we can. As soon as we're doing our best, we just have to be able to live with that. But that also is a language that we have to be able to work from and be able to talk to and be able to connect on within our own tribes and social groups.
And I think absolutely, Reg. I mean, definitely within the tribe, but also developing more tribes, or bringing people into the tribe.
Right.
We've had guests on the show who were mental health professionals who were not veterans,
right.
and they have taken the time to learn and understand and even come and develop, and it's about growing the understanding bigger. It's not about being exclusive and 25 acres in South Georgia, and we're just going to make a stand and nobody can come in and nobody can come out. That's not
No.
making a tribe. That's being isolationist. Instead,
Absolutely.
we need to help others understand, and there's a need for veterans to help step into the gap, the divide, and be willing to help civilians, those who had never served. I don't even like using the word civilians, but those that had never served understand more about their service.
That's right, Dwayne. And, it's being able to expand our social circles, beyond just our veteran tribe to our community. In a church organization, a veteran can be a great informer within his own church organization or within his Boy Scout troop or within, without whatever groups he's involved in, whether it be Lions Club or Rotary or even his, I was at a BFW meeting the other night, and I'm 55, and I was the youngest guy there by 15 years.
Right.
The next guy was 70.
Right.
So there's an opportunity here in our community for us as veterans to go to these meetings and get engaged, because there's a wealth of information, a wealth of opportunity right in our community, and that's through connection, finding opportunities and connecting. It may require one night a month to go to the meeting or whatever, but it's an opportunity to stay connected and be informed, because right now, as you know, the World War II veterans are dying off fast. Sadly, that's just what way it is. But now our Vietnam veterans and those folks, that have gone through many of the trials that we're working through already and successfully gone through them, are out there willing to help and show path. And we're not leaning into some of that heritage that we have at that level either. We're leaning on the guys that, have been to, Iraq 3 times or 2 times or Afghanistan. And, we kind of recycle that, but there's a wealth of information we haven't even plugged into us just yet. So we need to not lose track of that.
That is an excellent point, Reg. We can't complain about the system and not engage in the system to make it change.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the veterans of our generation, and granted, you and I, careerists that recently got out,
right.
But I'm in my 40s, and if I don't step out and start making a change, then it's not going to happen. As I've said before, and that we have the potential to be this century's greatest generation. This, we have the numbers, certainly nowhere near World War II numbers, but amplifying our voice by the platform of podcasting and internet and social media. But we have the ability and the responsibility. We have to accept that, because if we don't, we can be much more like the World War I generation, kind of lost and uncertain and just kind of, not really very effective. It's funny that you mentioned the VFW, because I went to my local VA recently to engage in a veterans advocacy panel, and I was the youngest in that room by at least 25 years. You know, and
Yeah.
it's and even they said they turned to me and they said, how can we get more veterans of your era in here? You know,
Right.
and you know, and some of it is, of course, you know, careers and lives, and second, you know, but others is we can't just shake the fist at the system and expect
Right.
it to change if we don't turn our fist into an open hand and kind of, you know, get to work.
Absolutely. That is absolutely true, Dwayne. And, you know, you bring up the World War II veterans and stuff like that, but, you know, this is a different time because technology has given us opportunity for our force to be smaller. We operate a little differently. You know, back in World War II era, you know, we mobilized the nation and went to war for, you know, a couple of 3 years. And I'm not going to embarrass myself and say 5, 6, or 4, or 3, whatever it was. I think I know. But the point is that we've been at war now for 17, you know, and going on 17 anyway. And because we've been at war for this long, you know, it's a generational issue. So we don't go to war together and then come back together and go work at the factory together like they did from World War II. You know, we have generational issues here where, you know, where our population base isn't as, you know, a smaller portion of our population base is gone. And you know, back then you couldn't throw a rock out your front door and not hit a veteran. Now you can throw many rocks out your front door and not hit a veteran for miles. And that's the challenge we face. And so that common connectedness that we talk about, the things that we lean into, or I speak a lot about as a tribesman, you know, was common in the 40s coming out of World War II. And now not so much, because those often are our veterans don't even speak of it. They just stay quiet. And we really need their engagement. We need them to be part of this and help. And I'm not say do all the heavy lifting. Just acknowledge yourself. Acknowledge us so that we connect. And people say, well, I don't want to join another organization. Hey, it's one night a month, and the dues are so simply cheap. You know, it's not like it's good. It's a community builder, because they often, these VFW organizations, American Legions, they invest in the community constantly, trying to create space and scholarships. And many of the veterans' kids are eligible for those scholarships if they apply. You know, there's a bigger reason in some of this, not to mention they help with the benefits on the Hill tirelessly, you know, help us get some of those benefits that we get from the VA. So we just be mindful that it's more than just, you know, meeting some old guys in a room. There's a lot of work going on in the background that we could certainly benefit from, and not only that, but be part of to help that next generation coming in, our sons and daughters.
Yeah, no, and absolutely, and it is going to come because you know, it's as you said, this is the first cross-generational war in American history, and it seems to not be on many people's radar. But a lot of it has to do with having these conversations, and this has been a really great one, Reg. I really appreciate. So if you know, listeners want to hear more about what you're doing and connect with you, where can they find you, sort of on the web and social media?
Well, social media is the best place, LinkedIn, and you know, you can post my email on there. I'm fine with that. People told me an email. I'm happy to visit, and you know, I just think it's important we keep the dialogue going. I think we have to continue to talk about this, and I just don't know of another way to make change. And social media certainly gets the word out fast, but it's actually us, not me and you, but us collectively doing the things, making the connections, and taking the first step. And sometimes that, you know, to use a Bill Hybel term, you know, walk across the room. You got to be able to walk across the room and ask the question, how can I help you? Are you okay? You know, and you got to get uncomfortable. And I've been accused of being friendly as a wet dog, and that's okay. I'd rather be known as being too friendly than not. So.
Well, I appreciate you bringing the wet dog into this particular room, Reg, and as always, great connecting with you, great having a conversation with you, and look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
No problem, Dwayne. Thank you.
You're listening to Headspace and Timing on the Change Your POV Podcast Network. That was a great conversation. As I mentioned several times during this episode, Reg's goals and the goals we have here on the show and the Headspace and Timing blog are very similar, changing the way that we think and talk about veteran mental health. The more awareness we have, the greater chance that a veteran will reach out for the support that they need. Since Reg and I talked, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine released a report detailing a study of the Department of Veterans Affairs mental health care system. I talked about that report back in episode 45 with Dr. Alicia Karaquiri. One of the major findings in that report was that current era veterans who have significant others, family members, and friends who support their seeking treatment are much more likely to use VA healthcare services than veterans without such support. That supports what Reg was talking about here in this episode. The family is at the core of veteran mental health. Unfortunately, it's also one of the first things impacted by the significant deployment times caused by the current conflicts. The RAND Corporation has conducted research into both divorce rates and marriage satisfaction, as both of them are impacted by deployments. Experiencing one or more deployments is associated with decreased marital satisfaction, but that decrease is mostly accounted for by the aftermath of trauma experienced by service members during the deployment. In other words, the more deployments that a service member has and the more exposure to traumatic events during those deployments, the lower the marital satisfaction. One of the other findings, though, is that military marriages that remain intact appear to adapt to the demands of deployment, learning as the months pass and over repeated deployments how to prevent the experience from inflicting increasing damage to their relationships. I'll provide a link to this research in the show notes if you're interested in looking that up. The bottom line up front, the family impacts and is impacted by veteran mental health. It's a team sport, and the greater awareness that we have, the better that we'll play the game. Thanks again for taking the time to listen to the show. Now that you're here, make sure that you stick around by subscribing on your podcast player of choice. If you're not sure how to do that, drop me a line at Dwayne@veteranmentalhealth.com. I'm always interested in hearing what you think about the show, what you think we should talk about, what you think we shouldn't talk about. Make sure you spell it the right way, DUANE. You can find the show notes for this episode and all the episodes by going to veteranmentalhealth.com or changeyourpov.com. Sign up for updates on either and both so that you don't miss another episode. While you're at it, check out the other great shows on the Change Your POV podcast network. Changing Hearts and Minds with my buddy, Special Forces Weapons Sergeant Jeff Adamick, the show about outdoor adventures that veterans love so much, Neophyte in the Woods with Andrew McDowell, and of course our flagship show hosted by Eddie Lazary and Bennett Tanton. If you're looking for the total package for all the information you need to live the life you want after leaving the military, you found it on the Change Your POV podcast network. Stick around for next week's show where I hit an important milestone with this show, the 50th episode. For a podcast, the 50th episode is sort of the mark where things either start to get established or start to drop off. We're just getting started here, but it's a good chance to look around, see how far we've come, and look forward to see where we're going. I want to thank Doc Todd for his permission to use his track Not Alone from his amazing album Combat Medicine. Doc Todd is someone who's trying to bring veteran mental health out of the darkness and into the light, and you can get the album by going to therealdoctodd.com. Check it out, because remember, veterans, you're not alone. Ever.
The struggle is real, found a feast and lost a soul. Eventually my drinking, it got out of control. There in darkness I roam, struggling to find home. See, suddenly death didn't feel so alone. 22 a day, destination unknown. It could have been avoided if you picked up the phone, but now you're gone, so I guess all we get is the tone. Nothing but bone weeds, overgrown, pushing up stones. I've triumphed over enemies, co-created enemies. Broke out facilities that tried to put an end to me. R.I.P. I'd rather grind in tranquility. Authentic tendency, embrace my ability.
I try so hard to have faith. I bow my head and I pray. Lord, please let me have the strength to carry on and keep standing. How this life so demanding, so much pain, all this plenty. I heard each time my way, but with you I'm not alone.
Not alone. You're not alone.
Yeah, every time that I fall, I'ma call on you, get myself back up again.
Without my Georgia girls, yeah, I'd probably be dead. Cause I'd be taking every med that the VA said. Gave every shred, every last thread of my identity. Conquer my fragility, eliminate the enemy. Deliver me, God, from temptation. Tell me that this life is just a matrix. Need a facelift, back to basics. Vision LASIX, I only feel alive when I hear the bass kick.
I try so hard to have faith. I bow my head and I pray. Lord, please let me have the strength to carry on and keep standing.
Stand up.
How this life so demanding, so much pain, all this plenty. I heard each
guys. Take those bottles out, dog, and pour them in the sink. Take the needles out your arm and the gun away from your forehead. It's time, man, you've been through enough pain, stand up. It's time to stand back up. All my veterans, man, Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard. Get up, you know.
Oh, I try so